Hello and welcome once again to Beatle University. I am Professor Moptop, and as we continue to learn all sorts of things about the Beatles, it's time to take a look at one of their earliest influences. As the four individual Beatles were starting to discover rock and roll on their own, they were all individually drawn to the fun yet musical sounds of America's coasters. Throughout their early years, the Beatles, as well as the Quarrymen and Johnny and the Moondogs, performed several of the Coasters' songs on several occasions, and that's what we're going to learn about today.
I saw her standing on the corner, a yellow ribbon in her. I could the song myself calling. Wow, look at that, look at that, look at that. Wow, look at that.
The Coasters were formed in late 1955 in Los Angeles after several members of the Robins headed east to record some of the most memorable songs in the history of pop music, many of which were written by Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller. Jerry Leiber grew up in Baltimore. Mike Stoller came from Long Island. As teens, they both individually headed west with their families, joining forces in 1950. Stoller was a piano player and Leiber worked at Nordy's record store. The two quickly became friends after discovering their mutual love for the same types of music, primarily African-American created blues and rhythm and blues. Smokey Joe's Cafe, from the Robins, was written and produced by Leiber and Stoller, who released it on their independent Spark label.
Smokey Joe's Cafe. Smokey Joe's Cafe.
While only moderately successful, it was charming and intriguing enough to get the band and songwriting team a contract offer from Atlantic Records, based in New York City. Only two of the band members were willing to move to the other coast. The other two were replaced as the band was renamed the Coasters, which for them had multiple meanings, including the West Coast, the East Coast, driving aimlessly, a roller coaster, or the fact that they all jumped around from band to band to band or coasted before landing in the Coasters. Along with Leiber and Stoller, the quartet went on to record a series of theatrical storytelling songs, which took more production time than the average recordings of the time, but the Coasters' reputation and success allowed them the additional resources.
Young blood, I can't get you out of my mind.
The Youngblood single, backed with Searchin', was their breakthrough hit in 1957, and as both songs made their way even further east and a bit north, the Beatles got their hands on the 45 and immediately individually became enamored by not just the fact that there were songs that they liked on both sides of the 45, but they were better than average, written better with more complete stories. Leiber, Stoller, as well as Doc Pomus, who co-wrote Youngblood, were names that the young Beatles were starting to recognize as they studied the 45 labels. As John met Paul and then George joined the band, they discovered their mutual love for the Coasters and started performing their songs in their act, an early favorite being Youngblood, with George taking the lead and the other two singing Beatles chiming in with their funny voices, a lot like the original record.
I tried to talk, but I just stuttered. Why, what's your name?
What's your name? What's your name?
Young blood.
The song was likely part of their live show from very early on, possibly in the act even before Harrison. And while the Beatles never recorded Youngblood for an official record, there are a few recordings. Sometime in mid-62, they performed it at the Cavern Club, and it was recorded by someone who sold the tape for an undisclosed amount to an anonymous bidder who is reported to be Paul McCartney. The tape remains unreleased and unconfirmed, but they definitely played it for the BBC in June of '63. They did that for Pop Go the Beatles, now with Ringo as a band member.
Well, things went by. I met a dad, he said, you better leave my daughter alone. Well,
It wasn't on the first album and never seemed to be in contention for the second one, as the band perhaps seemed to think they were a bit beyond the point of the funny and silly song, trying to be taken more serious. The band felt that perhaps the songs made the record label not take them as seriously as they would if the Beatles would have performed just straight rock and roll. Being taken seriously was very important to the Beatles, although it took them, as well as Brian Epstein, a bit of time to realize that certain songs might be considered a bit more novelty than others. Curiously enough, even though the Beatles thought the music of the Coasters might have been a bit immature for their image, they too would try to write funny songs along the way.
I got no car and it's breaking my heart, but I found a driver and that's a start.
Most notably, Drive My Car in Norwegian Wood from Rubber Soul.
So
And with that, we say so long for now. Please join me again next time as we continue to learn as much as we possibly can about the Beatles. Until then, class dismissed! For Breakfast with the Beatles in 93 XRT, I am Professor Moptop.